Welcome to another episode of Recently Read, and this week I'm going to be reviewing Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. Hamnet originally came out in 2020, so about 5-6 years ago. And at the time that it came out, I avoided reading this book. I read reviews about it. I saw some interviews with Maggie O'Farrell. And they all seemed really quite interesting overall, but I just wasn't drawn to it. At the time, I was doing a course of study on Shakespeare at Hunter College, mostly focused on the histories, and also on the classical plays. So the histories are Henry IV, Henry V, Richard II, Richard III, and the classics influenced plays would be Julius Caesar, it would be Antony and Cleopatra, Timon of Athens, etc. I also took a course called Women in Shakespeare, and Women in Shakespeare, as the title would suggest, is focused on the women in Shakespeare's plays. That does include characters like Ophelia. It includes characters like Lady Macbeth, and so on and so forth. So I was doing a lot of stuff on Shakespeare, and reading doing a lot of historical background reading, as well as reading the actual plays, and they're absolutely wonderful, and I highly recommend them. Of course, this book came out at that time, and I remember thinking, well, it seems interesting, but it's not really my thing. At any rate, fast forward 6 years, and Hamnet is everywhere. So just recently, a film came out, as I imagine you're aware. Starring Paul Mescal and Jessie Buckley. Paul Mescal, of course, is like the big sort of star today, and Jessie Buckley is actually absolutely fantastic. And I saw the previews for this, not the previews, the trailers for this film, and I thought, that looks really good. I think I really want to see that. But before I see that, I'd like to read the actual book. So I picked up a copy, and I've been reading it for the last week or so. And in fact, we just actually got back from London, and this book is everywhere in London. It's all the bookshops, the Waterstones, Foyles, etc. There's tables with stacks of these books, and I even saw people on the street reading it. So people are really into this. Also on social media, I've been seeing a lot of posts by people saying, we really love this book. I cried through the whole thing. And so people have sort of a strong reaction to it. The book, first of all, even before I continue, I have to say that there are probably going to be some spoilers in this review. So I apologize ahead of time, but I'm just giving you some warning. Although I do feel that the spoilers that I give away, and really just one main one, it's sort of like one that I think it's sort of like, unless you're living under a rock, you're going to know what this spoiler is. It's sort of, there's much of the story sort of hinges on this, but it's pretty much given away in any review you might read about this book. Anyway, so the book is broken up, I would say, into 3 sections. Now, the chapters aren't broken up in that way, but the book sort of is. So I would say that the opening parts of the book, which constitute, I would say, the first over 100 and some odd pages, is what I would refer to in this context as world building. And so this is where the author is building the world around mainly Agnes or Anne Hathaway. So Anne Hathaway, or Agnes Hathaway, is the wife of William Shakespeare. Very little is known about this person. In fact, very little personal information is known about William Shakespeare and his wife Agnes and the children. What is known is sort of public records, so things like birth year, death year, documents related to ownership of houses and land and things like that. And that's sort of what's known about, William Shakespeare specifically. Just very little is known. He was born in Stratford-upon-Avon. He moved to London. He wrote and produced these plays. He was part of this theater company. etc. But very little is known about him personally. The same applies for Agnes. In fact, you could even say even less is known about her. What's known about her is the year she was born, the year that she married William Shakespeare, and her age, which was she was significantly older than William Shakespeare. This is something that has caused a lot of historians and sort of fans and sleuths regarding Shakespeare's life a lot of interest, because it seems very strange that he would be marrying someone so old. It's what's known is that she was already pregnant at the time of the marriage, which has led to a great deal of speculation about the nature of their relationship and the nature of the marriage. Although actually this was not a rare occurrence in this period. We're talking about the late 1500s, early 1600s. Well, they were married in the late 1500s. The exact year I don't know off the top of my head, but it's sort of not really that relevant. We can just say that it's very, very late in the 1500s, close to the 1600s. It wasn't uncommon for this to happen, what we might refer to as a shotgun wedding. So we know that they married. She was already pregnant. She was about 6 years older than William. We know that she had 3 children. We know that one of those children died. We know that she died approximately 4 years after William Shakespeare died. So even though she's older, she outlived him by a number of years. So these things are known. The things that are known about William Shakespeare are, of course, that he was born in Stratford-upon-Avon, that he moved to London, as I already mentioned, that he wrote and produced these plays, that he acted in these plays as well. He was an actor as well as a writer. He lived in London, and that he returned towards the end of his life back home to Stratford. So again, these are things that are known. Now, there are things that are not known. So some of the things that are not known, for instance, there's a period of time in Shakespeare's life before he starts producing these plays where it's just total darkness. Nothing is known whatsoever. And it's speculated that maybe he was traveling, maybe he undertook what's referred to as the Grand Tour, meaning that he visited Rome and he visited Venice and he visited these sort of like places that are part of the Grand Tour that certain aristocratic men took part in during their youth. But there's really no information about this, so we don't really know. Going back to what we do know, we also know that Shakespeare's father sort of ended up in disgrace. Reasons are sort of not fully known, but it has something to do, well, he did some sort of not good things. And so the family had kind of fallen in status in their hometown of Stratford. When Shakespeare returned, one of the things, or towards the end of Shakespeare's life, around the time that he was returning to Stratford, one of the things that he was trying to do was sort of to re-elevate the family. So he bought a coat of arms. Essentially, you could sort of buy into nobility to a certain degree. And so again, these are things that are known. With Agnes, it's really a blank slate. And in some ways, this is where Maggie O'Farrell really steps in. And she mentions this at the very, very end of the book, where she says, well, these are the things that are known, and these are the things that I don't know. And so this sort of creates this gap that I can really sort of fill in with this novel. She really, like I said, she really is a blank slate. There's just very, very little known about her. She left nothing behind in terms of writing. It's just, although there's some debates about that, some people argue that she may have had a hand in some of Shakespeare's writing. I'm skeptical about that, but that's not really the point of this review anyway. But really, she's just a blank slate. So the first part of this book is focused on world building. And Maggie O'Farrell kind of posits or sort of places or sort of suggests that Agnes Hathaway is a sort of wood sprite. Her mother sort of emerges from the forest and marries this farmer, and they have 2 children, one of whom is Agnes. The other one is Bartholomew, who is her brother and figures significantly in the book, and it appears also in the film, though I have not seen the film yet. And Agnes has these sort of like kind of magical powers. She's able to sort of tell the future by just seeing something or seeing someone walking on the street. She can detect whether or not this person is going to live a long life or not, how many children they're going to have, etc. So she's sort of like this magical figure, and much of the early part of this book, the first third, is sort of focused on that. Also, a little bit on building the world around William Shakespeare. Now, I should mention, well, a couple of things. First, regarding the names. People know Shakespeare's wife as Anne Hathaway, but there is some textual evidence that her name may have been Agnes. And so Maggie O'Farrell chooses to use Agnes as the main name, which I actually really like. It's, I think, a really pretty name, and I sort of enjoy her use of it in the book. So Agnes is that's the name of the wife. William Shakespeare, he's never named. So he's, in this book, he is referred to as the Latin tutor. He's referred to as the husband, the father, the son, but his name is actually never mentioned. But so there's some world building around him as well. His family life, which is not very nice. He's got sort of a violent father. His mother is not very nice either. They sort of see him as this kind of like do nothing, lazy, living his life just kind of in his head. And so these characters are developed. So that's the first third of the book. There's also, in the first third, there's this sort of meet cute where the two of them meet and they start a relationship. The second part of the book is their actual relationship. So this is the husband, William Shakespeare, unnamed, and Agnes Hathaway, and their marriage, their time together living in Shakespeare's house, because she moves into his family's home, and also the birth of the children. And it sort of ends with, and here's the spoiler alert, but again, if you know anything about Shakespeare, you're going to know this anyway, is that Hamnet dies. This is one of the sons of Shakespeare, of William Shakespeare and Agnes Hathaway. He's one of the twin. They have one daughter and then twins. And so Hamnet dies towards the end of this sort of like middle part of the book, which is their time and life together. And then the third part of the book is what I would say is, in capital letters, grief. And this is the part of the book that a lot of people really seems to connect with them. This period of like terrible grief that they both fall into in the wake of the death of the son. And this is something that seems to be a major theme in the movie, and is a major theme in the book. And so, when you read this, you have to prepare for that. The book is really sort of focused less on plot and more on this sort of emotional state that the characters kind of experience. So this is a huge part of the book. It takes up the last about 100 pages, and it sort of works its way towards the end of the book, which also includes, to a certain degree, the rise of the husband who's now moved to London as a successful person who works in a playhouse. And at Stratford, this seems to be a strange thing. Like, what is he, like how strange it is that this person's become quite wealthy or has done really, really well. And so this becomes part of the third part of the book, which is grief, and then the rise of the husband as a successful person. Okay, so things that I liked about the book. I like the world building. I think it's something that world building as a subject is something that I never really thought of in terms of literary books. I always considered that to be like a fantasy thing. Like fantasy writers create these elaborate worlds, like Tolkien or Frank Herbert for the Dune series. And so I don't really think of it in a book like Hamnet, but it's become this thing. Even when I was taking creative writing courses, we really didn't refer to it as world building. I think we just develop character development or just writing exercises. But I think that Maggie O'Farrell does a really great job with this. There's a really dreamy character that I actually think is quite beautiful, and she does this really effectively, especially in the first third of the book, where you're sort of in the world of Agnes, and the world of the forest, and the world of being able to understand people in this sort of like very intuitive way, the picking of herbs and roots to create these sort of healing potions that Agnes seems to be able to do and to help people with. And so I think this is done really effectively. I think the emotional aspect is really strong. So there's been a lot of debate recently about why should people read fiction, and really specifically why men should read fiction. And this is something that I've been very sort of concerned about, this idea of what you gain from reading. And I think that one of the things you gain from reading books is certain books is a certain amount of emotional intelligence. You may not experience these sort of things yourself, although you may. And these books are really well written that do a really good job of showing the emotions of the figures, of the people, of the characters, especially if their characters are not like you. I think really help sort of train your emotional intelligence. And I think this book does a wonderful job of that. Also, the sort of putting you in a place. So another thing that I love about novels, and nonfiction as well, but novels especially, good novels, is that they take you to a place and a time that's not your own. So, in this case, you're in 15/1600. So, so Renaissance, whatever you want to call it, England. So Stratford specifically. And the book does a pretty good job of placing you there and placing you in this world, in this time, in this milieu that is, maybe outside of your own period of time. Of course it is, because we live in the modern world. And so I think this is a really element that's quite strong. Another element has to do with both time, as I already mentioned, but also in terms of point of view or perspective. Actually, I should say perspective is really the more accurate term here. So both of these things kind of shift in the book from sort of subchapter to subchapter, where you will be in the present tense, to a certain degree, the present tense. So you have the young boy Hamnet running in the house, looking for his mother because his sister is ill, has become suddenly ill, and so he's looking for her. And then it shifts to the past, before Agnes meets William, or the husband, I should say. And so this is kind of the past. And then it shifts kind of towards the future, and or to another sort of time period, which is the time period of maybe the having the children. Also, the perspective, like I said, shifts. So 1 minute or one part, you're sort of in Agnes's mind, and then you're in the husband's mind, or the Latin tutor, or whatever, or you're in the father of the Latin tutor, so Shakespeare's father's mind, or you're in his mother's mind, or you're sort of shifting. And this is something that if you take a creative writing course, oftentimes if you do this, the teacher is going to say, hey, you don't really want to do this. You want to kind of stay in one perspective. And this is something that I've struggled with in writing courses, where I'm like, yeah, but here's an example of a writer who does this. And here's another example of another writer who does this. And I think oftentimes they're doing this because they're saying, hey, just kind of stick to something that you can handle. But at any rate, but it jumps around in that sense, and it's, I think, quite effective. Now, things that I don't like. Well, I think one of the things that I think is really weak actually in this book is the dialogue. So you have this shift from the sort of internal monologue and internal perspective of the world that I think is quite strong and really beautifully written. But then when it shifts to dialogue, I think this does not succeed. And again, I know people can disagree, and that you're welcome to, and tell me why. But my feeling is that the author was sort of trapped between trying to write in a kind of archaic or period correct way, but at the same time trying not to write in an obviously Shakespearean way, which I think would be it would feel very artificial. And so she kind of chooses a middle ground. And every time I would read dialogue, it would just pull me right out of the story because it just seemed very strange to me. And the children would kind of speak in this way, and the adults would speak in the same way as well. And it just totally pulls me out of the story, and I don't think it's successful. Another thing that I think maybe bothered me about this book is the whole time I sort of felt that it was almost manufactured with the intention of turning it into a film. And so I worked in publishing for a small period of time. Well, I say small, I worked in publishing for about 7 years. And I sort of saw the marketing side of it because I worked in special sales and co-op sales. And so my job was to sort of place books in accounts that were not traditional accounts, but also to do co-op advertising. So co-op advertising is where an outlet, a bookstore, would sort of get a credit. So bookstores would buy a certain number of books, and then they would get this sort of credit towards marketing that the publisher would pay. And this would include things like product placement. And so this book feels sometimes as if it's written with the express intention of that it's going to be a product that's going to sell to a certain demographic. And almost as if a movie contract was already signed even before the book was written. The book is cinematic. Now that could be a positive, but in my opinion, it feels almost artificial. And so there was this intention that this book was going to be a product. Maggie O'Farrell is a popular writer, but she's also at this point in her career. She was at a point in her career where I think I could see an editor saying, okay, we're in this mid-career point. What are we going to do to like really make something pop? And so the book feels like it's almost engineered in this way. Also, lastly, my feeling is that the ending, which is seems to be a very sort of major part of the film, just from what I've seen from previews, from trailers. To me, it felt like an afterthought. It's rushed. It feels like we got to this point where the author just wants to keep writing about the emotional state of the family in the wake of the death of the son, but instead has to finish the book. And so, there's this feeling that this part is really, really rushed. And there's even some literary inconsistencies that maybe a person who's just reading through the book and really enjoying it may not notice. But if you read it with a little bit more of a critical eye, you will notice. And when you notice it, it really jumps out. I would describe this as the Starbucks cup in Game of Thrones, where you see Game of Thrones, you really like it. It's one of your favorite shows. The sets are really sort of very elaborately done. And then someone points out to you that there's a Starbucks cup on the table in the background of this particular scene. And all of a sudden, that's all you can see. And this is kind of my feeling. It's like she was rushing to finish this book. And so there's these like obvious inconsistencies that really, really stand out. And so that really pulled me out of the book. So finally, where would I place this? Like, what would I say? Is this something that would I recommend? This book has gotten universal accolades. Everyone seems to love it. Everyone loves it. I have not been able to find a single negative or even ambiguous review about this book. I feel much differently about it. And so this is sort of unpopular. I don't know that I wouldn't say this is not recommended. That would be a total sort of shutdown of the book. But I definitely don't think it's required. I don't think it's recommended. I would sort of say, yeah, it's suggested if you're interested in sort of the world of sort of almost like this sort of fan fiction of Shakespeare, then this is a good book for you. I did enjoy the book, but I also felt that it's not a great book. I think it's an okay book. I think it's a perfectly nice book. It's sort of kind of almost like fantasy in some ways. It's not fantasy, but it just sort of like good fan fiction about Shakespeare. I read a recent article in the New York Times that says, every generation gets the Shakespeare that they want. In the 90s, the Shakespeare was from Shakespeare in Love. It was, from that movie, with the earrings. And this book actually kind of even focuses on the earrings a bit. And so this is the Shakespeare that people want. More recently, the Shakespeare of the aughts, or the sort of in the last 10 years, is sort of like the queer Shakespeare, the sort of ambiguous Shakespeare. And now what we have is the sort of Paul Mescal Shakespeare, this sort of like kind of like dreamy guy, kind of modern Shakespeare, kind of as seen through this actor. And in many ways, this book kind of gives you that. Shakespeare is sort of a flattened character. There's not much to him. In fact, he's very sort of like a very sort of surface level character, as is actually all the characters other than Agnes. And so this is the Shakespeare that we want. We sort of want a little bit of a fantasy Shakespeare, I guess. And so this is what we get. And, I don't think it's a great book. I think it's mediocre, maybe sounds a bit harsh, but it's like it's sort of like a beach read. And so I don't think it's required. I think there's a lot of great books out there if you want to learn about Shakespeare, great history books, and even maybe even some good history books, some good biographies. There's actually maybe a really good biography about Agnes by Germaine Greer that I actually would recommend if you really want to know something about Agnes Hathaway. But this is nice, you can read it on a long flight. I read literally 100 pages of this book in 3 or 4 hours on a train ride from London. So you can kind of consume it very quickly, and it's very enjoyable. It's not required reading. It's not recommended reading. It could say it's probably suggested reading. And I think that if you're sort of a person who is really interested in female stories, which I personally am, and you're really interested in historical fiction, like if you're a fan of Girl with a Pearl Earring or something like that, I would say this book is more romancy than that. But I'd say this is kind of in that realm. If you like those kinds of books, I think this is a great book for you. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe and tune in for our next required reading. Have a great week.
If you made it this far, make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you are notified of any upcoming episodes. It's free for you, but it means the world to us.